Hi, welcome to Danger Dice with Rick Danger Prime. This channel is going to be all about TTRPGs. Dungeons and Dragons will be something we touch on, but we're mostly focusing on non-Dungeons and Dragons TTRPGs. If you're new to the world of TTRPGs, that stands for tabletop role-playing games. And what we're going to start with today is Project Black Flag from Kobold Press. Their new TTRPG system, new in quotes. There's been some chatter about what's new and what's not, and we'll review that and go over it. And we'll even look at one of their developers put out a sort of statement, a little blog post on their website about how this is sort of new, sort of not, and that is the exact intent of it. So let's go ahead and dive right in with that blog post. I think it'll be interesting to review this before we dig into the first playtest packet because Black Flag is still in its playtest phase. They've only released one packet with some basic information, no classes. We'll get into that. But we're going to start with this blog post because it gives us some perspective and some context around some of the things we'll talk about and why, when I look at the playtest packet, I'm going to compare it to D&D 5e so much. So let's look at that. So this is Kobold Press's website, and this is from Celeste Konowich, one of their lead designers, developers over there. Um, And she says, greetings, mateys. My name is Celeste Konowich. I am Kobold Press's senior game designer, and I wanted to give y'all some frank updates on what's happening with the design of Project Black Flag. What is the point? Um, so, a lot of people are talking about how this is just a 5e clone, and in a way, it is. Um, so, so far, Dungeons and Dragons has had this whole OGL thing. Maybe I'll make another video just recapping the events of a few weeks ago with the whole OGL open gaming license that D&D had, was going to try and instate a new one, and then backpedaled big time and maybe helped themselves a little bit in the community's eyes, but not enough. We'll see. But anyway, what happened was a lot of people thought that D&D 5e, which is so beloved, was going to get taken away. And one of the and that chatter has been happening for a while now. That's not new, but we just got details within the last few weeks that caused a huge uproar. And so Kobold Press has been working on this for a while based off of the whispers of, ooh, the OGL is going to change. Oh, there's going to be updates. And essentially what they're doing here is they're making fifth edition available for everybody forever, which Wizards of the Coast has done with Dungeons and Dragons fifth edition. They recently put that open gaming license or the SRD, the system reference document, into Creative Commons, which preserves it for all of time. What Kobold Press is doing is they're sort of taking that SRD that's in Creative Commons now, and they're saying, okay, so how about we take this, make it truly backwards compatible? Again, another thing we'll talk about with 1D&D at some point, um, and really smooth out the rough edges. Really make a game that is still true to 5th edition. You can use all your 5th edition materials. I've got books and everything up here from any third-party creator that created for 5th edition and use it for Project Black Flag going forward. And so that's the thing that they're wanting. They say, time to end the monopoly. Make another group that is making a 5th edition 5.5 is what a lot of people are calling it. And then to that point, instead of chopping and screwing 5th edition until it looks like a 6th edition, which really is what 1D&D seems to be looking like they're going to do. They're just saying, let's take 5th edition, make updates, and bring it up to where it needs to be. Um, so we'll scroll down to, wait, what are you changing? You heard me. We're changing stuff that needs to be changed, and doing it in a way that respects your current 5e library and keeps it useful. That's what we mean when we say the mystic words backwards compatible. Our goal is to change stuff and then give you clear instructions to help you keep using your current 5e material that might no longer be perfect fit with the well-needed changes. We're also trying to do that in a way that won't make PCs or GMs want to cry in frustration. Those are all some big asks, but we're trying to do it anyway, because you, a fellow D&D lover, deserve to have it all. So this is really nice. So even though they're making updates using the SRD for Project Black Flag, they know that not 100% of previous 5e material is going to translate over into Black Flag. So what they're doing is they'll even give you a small guide within this. I'm excited to see that on how to translate anything that has been changed. I have a feeling they're going to focus on keeping that minimal since their entire point is to keep backwards compatibility. And especially since Kobold Press has produced many, many, many publications for 5th edition, they don't want to invalidate all of their material with their own TTRPG system. So that makes sense. So, how Black Flag gives 5e power to the people. We've heard you say, but why? The SRD is in Creative Commons now. We invite you to relook at the SRD and note just how much beloved 5e stuff is not in it. Do you want to just play a champion fighter until the end of time? Neither do we. Here's a list of things other Kobold designers and I are creating as replacements for the great core rulebook bits that we all wish were in the SRD. Alternatives for the Player's Handbook subclasses missing from the SRD. Reimagining the feats missing from the SRD as talents. Spoiler alert, it's all of them except Grappler. Lore text for every monster in the SRD. Only stat blocks are in the SRD. So, there's a lot that's not in the SRD. There's one subclass per class. And so that's what their whole joke about only playing a champion fighter for the rest of time. There's, there's no Eldritch Knight. There's no Dragoon. That's probably nice. There's only, I think, a life cleric, things like that. So they're going to put in all of these subclasses, make them all available. They're changing feats to talents because the only feat in the SRD is Grappler, which is not great. And the only reason Grappler is in there is to give players an example of here's what a feat is, here's kind of how it works or the power level that it gives you, go make your own. Grappler's a bad example of that, folks. It's just not good. And then also lore. So, they mention things like Strahd, they mention things like a Beholder, and they have stat blocks for some creatures, but that's it. They don't have any of the lore surrounding it, so if you want to use it for anything else, you're out of luck. Playtest packet number 1. They're changing the presentation of the information. Lineage and heritage, we'll get into that when I review playtest packet number 1. But they no longer grant ability score increases. Those are just tied to determining your ability scores, which is great. I really like that. A PC's choice of lineage, heritage, background, and personal proclivities, profession, etc., no longer influences starting ability scores. A PC determines their starting ability scores during the Determine Ability Scores step of character creation. We've cut the unnecessary additional task of raising or lowering them during 2 other entirely different steps of character creation. I think that's great. I love that. It really simplifies it. You're doing all your ability scores at one time and you're done. Um, PCs now choose a lineage and a heritage. They've split race and subrace that is in 5th edition into lineage and heritage. We'll talk about that. I think they should arrange them and maybe balance them a little better. But I really do appreciate what they're doing to separate those two things, so that your heritage is not based on your biology. You know, the culture you grew up in and your biology don't have to have anything to do with each other. It's really nice. Um, Talent system. So, feats have been eliminated in favor of the new talent system, on top of allowing us to recreate better versions of the feats that are not in the SRD, which again is all of them except Grappler. We have some global improvements as well. Talents are not an optional rule, they are a core part of the game. That was not true in 5e. Talents are divided into three categories: martial, magic, and technical. Each class is tied to one of the three talent categories. Characters that gain a talent from their improvement must choose it from the list that matches their class talent list. Every background grants a talent during character creation. We'll jump straight into reworking backgrounds. The traits, ideals, and bonds and flaws tables have been removed from backgrounds. They have been replaced with a single adventuring motivation table that encourages players to look forward instead of backward when creating character narratives. Let's reclaim all that page space eaten up by lackluster tables. I appreciate what they're doing there. I always thought that the traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws were a little bulky. I feel like ideals and flaws I liked, because it suggests, especially to newer players or somebody struggling to come up with like what they want to do narratively with the play with the character. It's nice to have those options just as inspiration. I do like what they did with the uh, adventuring motivation. That's kind of nice. It's straight to the point. Why are you an adventurer and not just a regular person that got a job? Whatever. Um, so here are some of the things they already have gotten some feedback on playtest packet number one. Um, they want to make the rules easier to read and understand. There were a few things that I found that fall under that category, but it's not too bad. Provide tools to reduce GM burden, encounter building tools, exploration encounter tools, social encounter tools, etc. That will be amazing. I'll be very excited about that. Rebalance a whole lot of existing junk, especially feats and classes. Yeah. Uh, and already I found in the playtest packet 1 some balancing things that could, you know, be adjusted. Provide opportunities for PCs to make meaningful choices at higher levels. Yeah, this was one issue with 5th edition, that when you hit 18, 19, and 20 level, some of the abilities you get are really lackluster. It's like, yeah, I made it all the way to level 20, and I guess I live forever now, but that's kind of it. You know, there was a lot of stuff like that that made those level caps, those capstones, very boring and sad and disappointing. Um, Make spellcasting feel even cooler. Yeah, that is one thing that I didn't expect out of Black Flag, because spellcasting is already pretty cool. But yeah, I'm interested on that note if they're going to do things to balance martial characters with spellcasters, because it gets a little unbalanced at higher levels. Okay, so that is the note from Celeste Konowich over at Kobold Press. So now let's just jump in and let's look at the actual playtest packet number one. Now, I might split this into two videos because, you know, it's lengthy going through each and every section, but we'll see. We'll see how long I go. Playtest packet number one. Um, so first and foremost, this system will be backward compatible with D&D 5e, as we've mentioned. Um, 5e was the thing that really grew D&D into what it is today. Over the last few years, uh, content from community, from shows like Critical Role, of course, and now they've got their own animated series. And, they're coming out with a movie, but I feel like that's more of a product of how well D&D has been doing. And so all of these things, pop culture, Stranger Things, that's what I was trying to think of, have really grown D&D, but also 5th edition is part of that. Because without 5th edition, previous editions of D&D were a lot more complex, a lot more rule heavy, especially 4th edition was real clunky. You almost couldn't play it without some kind of battle grid. Now with 5th edition, you can do Theater of the Mind, where you just kind of talk about where people are and how they're moving around to do combat. And it made the point of entry, the ease of entry for new players, so easy. I started with 5th edition and it was very easy to just walk right in. Now, I get that WotC is doing that with 1D&D. They want to keep that sort of simplicity on it. And I am excited to see what rules come of 1D&D. There have already been some playtest rules that came out that I really enjoy and I think are great. And I think it would behoove Project Black Flag to take a look at that. But to keep 5e and all the content that was made and keep it viable going forward, I think is a great idea. So, through this, let's see. The core fantasy system, that's what Project Black Flag is kind of naming itself for now. We don't have an official title for this TTRPG. Is backwards compatible with 5th edition and can be used in conjunction with any existing 5e material. Since this document does not include class options, which will start rolling out in playtest packet number 2, that's exciting. Creating a complete character from scratch using the rules found in this packet will require the use of an existing 5e base class. Not bad, as we'll see that translates very easily. Alternatively, you can easily swap the options presented in this packet for any existing 5e options. Here are the guidelines to keep in mind when doing so. So these 3 bullet points just talk about how Black Flag will skew a little bit more powerful than standard 5e. That's mostly because they get traits at first level. And honestly, the traits are better. So it's not too difficult to balance those if you want to pull Black Flag into your 5e game. I've got a high level game, so I'm probably not going to pull any of this in now. But if anybody in my game wants to use a trait from this, I will absolutely let them. So the introduction on here. So Labyrinth is sort of their multiverse that they're building, which I love. It's a great way to combine any worlds that you've made or pull in Kobold Press's pre-made worlds. Their Midgard setting is a fairly gritty setting, fantasy-wise. It's Northern European-esque. We'll look into it on the show sometime. But I really like the wording here. It keeps it simple but inspiring. What is core fantasy role-playing system? Uh, this is the standard sort of verbiage here talking about how there's a game master, there's PCs. We see that through here. They have good descriptions of what a role-playing game is. The description of perceiving the world through the character's senses and reacting as they would is a really good way of explaining to somebody completely new that, hey, look, you're imagining. I don't want to say pretend, that puts a lot of people off. You're imagining what would it be like to be this person in this particular situation. So a person with these abilities, with this experience and background and personality in this place at this time in this situation. Pretty standard dice. Let's see. Other tools you need. So we get a glimpse of what Kobold Press is going to release for the full game here. They mention the Monster Vault and the Game Master Guide, so that's similar to the 5e Dungeon Master's Guide and uh, Monster Manual. Uh, yeah, this is in line with what they made. So what's in this book outlines what the full book will entail once it's complete. We'll see what that looks like when it's done. So creating a character, they talk a lot about the character concept. Oh, I skipped over core fantasy in a nutshell. Basically on this, what I really like, this is more for the GM, but it's like, hey, here are the 5 things that define a fantasy world for this game. You don't have to stick with it. You can make a cyberpunk world or whatever, but you're going to have to do a lot of reflavoring of abilities and spells and things like that. They won't fit into that as easily. So here is sort of what this game was designed to go into, the kind of world, which I like. It's nice, and it's neat and it's brief. It doesn't take up a lot of your time. Some TTRPG systems have a lot of really clunky, long-winded verbiage explaining what it is. So, character creation. This is the general spiel that I give most players. What type of character would you like to play? Before I even show them the mechanics, do you want to be somebody speedy and quick? Do you want to be like a big, strong fighter, cast spells, things like that? And then I refine it from there. Give some pop culture examples. Do you want to be like Blade from the Blade movies? Things like that. Um, Choosing a class, uh, pretty straightforward. So are, level and hit points and hit dice. These are all very 5th edition proficiency bonus as well, although they do have some rules in here about how proficiency bonuses stack that's very interesting. Determining ability scores. So first level ability score bonuses are determined as part of rolling or assigning, depending on what system you're using, the stats and not part of race or class. I like that they have this player advice blurb down here because I was really worried when I first read through this. I was like, oh my gosh, you're going to get some barbarians that have no strength and, an 18 charisma. Um, but they do sort of explain like, hey, make sure whenever you see a particular ability score referenced in the rules, assume it means, oh, no, that's not here. Um, they do have, oh, down here. Player advice. Remember, each character class includes suggestions of the most useful way to assign your ability scores if you want to maximize the effectiveness of your class features. So yeah, this isn't about optimizing or min-maxing. This is more about make sure your character can do the things that they can do. You don't want a wizard that fails every spell attack or every enemy, succeeds on all their spell, DCs. That just makes for a boring character that doesn't ever get to do anything cool. So I'm glad they had that in there because it goes through a lot before it gets to that, and I was quite worried. So there's a few things to note here. You get the power level skews a bit differently, just slightly in Black Flag, where ability scores at first level, 5e caps first level scores, sort of caps at 16. There are ways you can bump that 16 higher, but Black Flag allows 2 points to be added to a score of 16 or lower, and 1 point to be added to a score of 17 or lower. And this just adds some options and some flexibility, but it basically says, hey, you're going to go as high as 18 at the beginning. But the difference is in 5e, they cap you at 16, and then there are some potential other ways you can bump those scores higher, depending on the race and the background and all those things that you pick. But if you don't pick those particular ones, then you're still sort of stuck at like a 16 or a 17, depending on which system you use. Um, Whereas this is standard saying, hey, you're going to hit an 18 if you want to at first level, and then you're done. I like that. You don't feel as a new player sitting at a table like, oh, this why is this guy so powerful over here? Because he's been playing for so many years and knows exactly which race and class and all of that to min max. It smooths things out. So I like that. Um, Point buy and standard array are also updated to allow those higher first level scores with a point pool of 32 versus 5e's 27. And a standard array of 16, 15, 13, 12, 10, and 8, uh, dropping the 14 and adding the 16. Here we see the note about making sure you look at your ability score for your class. So lineage and heritage. This is a large departure from 5e. 5e had a race and subrace system that was locked in. Once you choose your race, you had to pick a subrace from one of that race's options. There were some newer options that gave some flexibility, but still locked you out of a majority of the race options. Black Flag has instead split it into lineage, which represents your biology, and heritage, which represents the culture you were brought up in. There are suggested lineage and heritage combinations, but none of the combos are required, and you can get very creative with it. More options are always good. We'll look at those in a minute, and I'll show you where I think it can be tweaked. That I think tying some of the heritages to lineages is a little odd when the entire point is to divert from that sort of locked-in system. But um, but we'll look at that when we get there. There's a final checklist that's nice. I would like to have little tick boxes here, but this is something that I don't see I see in some TTRPGs where it's like, hey, here's all the stuff bullet pointed that we just talked about above. It's really nice. You can go through and just check off like, okay, I have all of these done. Okay. So gaining levels. HP and XP, methodology here, gaining levels is very similar. Um, they make a note about adjusting your con score before you determine your hit points. That's nice. Um, the one thing to mention is their suggested milestone leveling. They have levels 1 through 3 gaining a level after the equivalent number of sessions. So 1 to 2, level 1 to level 2 after one session, level 2 to level 3 after 2 sessions, and level 3 to level 4 after 3 sessions, and after that, gain a level every 3 sessions. I get what they're getting at as a suggestion on here's how you can do milestone leveling instead of tracking experience, which I think is a little laborious. It's weird to say this specific number of sessions is where you want to determine a level. Um, you know, Putting aside being in the middle of adventure at the end of a session or not, still some people's sessions are 2 hours, some are 5 or 6 hours. Some people have a session once a month, some people have a session every week. And it to put that tight of, I don't want to say restriction, it is just a suggestion. But even that suggestion just seems a little too tight. Um, Again, I get what they're getting at, and it's to help new people running a game. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe more ranges in there or something. Let me know what you think. Uh, so lineage, age, size, speed is kind of what is in there. Any sort of innate abilities that your genetics would give you. Um, Heritage, tangible and intangible cultural elements. The heritages are listed within each lineage, while I see the thought process for this, I think the lineages and the heritages should be listed separately. And maybe each one has a suggested good fit between them. So you see like a heritage, and down at the bottom it says like common lineages, and it says like elf, something like that. So that it is that good narrative suggestion if you don't want to come up with all the cultures of your world yourself, or if you don't want to figure out what your player, if you want to play a super elfy elf, then it has that suggestion of matching the elf lineages with a heritage that's usually elf. But by actually nesting the heritages within each lineage, I feel like it's framing it in a way that's counter to the whole point of separating those. Um, but uh, but let me know what you think. I think it would be a good move. So suggestions in general are nice for the narrative. Um, uh, but like they have alignment and languages in here that again, I'm fine with the alignment suggestions. I think that that is something that happens. Um, where they're saying a cultural alignment. I feel like that's good. And again, they're just suggestions. The languages are again, if you're going to suggest a heritage that aligns with a lineage, I feel like the language would be obvious. And so maybe if you, I don't know, I don't know. I think I like what they did versus all the alternatives. Just split those heritages and those lineages. So let's look at dwarves. Um, so your age, size, speed are the same as 5e, but they've adjusted night vision. It was dark vision in 5th edition. Now it's night vision. Works the same. I'd be interested to see if they have a night or a dark vision that works differently. I think that might just be confusing. So I'm curious as to why the verbiage change here. Um, you get Dwarven Resilience, which was common in 5th edition, but Dwarven Toughness you didn't get unless you picked a specific subrace. The Hill Dwarves got that. But it's nice. Resilience gives you advantage on saves against poison and resistance to poison damage. Always nice. And toughness means your hit points increase by one every level. So one extra hit point every level starting at first. And then we get into heritages. Again, this, if they want a human to be able to pick Fireforge, then don't nest it under dwarf. As a new player, I would look at humans further down, and I would just look at those options, and I wouldn't think to look at another race for other heritage options. So I like the flavor text here. It's really fun. There is the alignment. Take it or leave it. Let me know what you think if alignment suggestions, because this is only a suggestion. They're not saying you have to be these alignments. Um, but let me know if you could take or leave alignments. Expert Artisan, you gain proficiency with glassblower's tools or smith's tools. Choose one of these tools. Your proficiency bonus is doubled for any ability check you make that uses the chosen tool. We'll come back and talk about this when we get to some of the abilities further down in this document about how proficiency bonus stacking in Black Flag is going to work, because it's interesting. Forgecraft, you are resistant to fire damage. Um, Resistance to fire damage is really good, and it's interesting as a heritage trait. In a magical world, it would make sense that you can just have magical qualities, not from your training or your biology, but just exposure to where you grew up. I feel like that makes sense. I like that it's in there. It's fun. Um, Friend to elementals, you can speak, read, and write Ignan in addition to your chosen language. Um, Reforge, your people have a deep connection with elemental fire and have collectively learned how to repair forged items with a touch. You know the mending cantrip and you can cast it as an action. Normally, it takes a minute. However, you can use this trait to repair objects made only of metal, such as reconnecting two halves of a broken sword. That one's nice. You get an extra cantrip out of your heritage. It has some, it's not limited use, it has bonus use in certain situations, which is nice. Languages, you know common and one additional language of your choice. Typical creatures of this heritage choose Dwarvish. So that's where I was talking about, you know, do you want to tie heritages to lineages? I feel like I've said that a million times, so I'll stop saying it. I probably won't. Stone heritage traits. So these are more mountainy dwarves, whereas these are like fire volcano dwelling dwarves. See, I'm even saying it. I'm saying dwarves here because they put it under dwarves. Um, again, alignment suggestion. Dwarven weapon training, proficiency with battle axe, hand axe, light hammer, and warhammer. Dwarven armor training, you have proficiency with light and medium armor. Additionally, your speed is not reduced by wearing heavy armor, regardless of your strength score. That's nice. That's a little different from 5e. Um, Tool proficiency. You gain proficiency with the artisan's tools of your choice, smith's tools, brewer's supplies, or mason's tools. That's always nice. I feel like they're going to try and focus a little more on tool usage in Black Flag. It was always something in 5e that was just kind of forgotten about. It's like, oh yeah, you do have that, don't you? I guess if you remembered that you have that proficiency, we can use it in this situation. But most people didn't. Most people forgot that they had it. Again, languages, Dwarvish. um, Elves. Let's look at elves. So, elves, age, size, speed, again, night vision. These are all similar, if not exactly the same as 5th edition. Keen senses, magic ancestry, um, trance, all of those are the same. Their wording here for the you get a long rest in 4 hours is good. I think the semi-conscious word that they use there maybe needs some clarifications. I can see rules lawyers and sort of min-maxers trying to squeak out like well, I can keep watch because I'm semi-conscious. Um, and, you know, GM has final say, but still better to just ignore that conversation in the first place. Um, Cloud Heritage, I love the flavor here. It feels more interesting and a little less haughty than 5e's High Elves. Elves that trying to learn magic built these big floating cities and stuff. It's very cool. It's very inspirational. Alignment is there. Touch of Magic. Choose a school of magic for which you have cultivated an affinity. You learn a cantrip of your choice from that school of magic. When you reach 3rd level, choose a 1st level spell from that same school. And when you reach 5th, choose a 3rd level from that same school. You learn these spells and can cast them at their lowest level. Once you cast one of these spells, you must finish a long rest before you cast them again using this feature. Spellcasting ability for these spells is Charisma, Intelligence, or Wisdom, chosen during character creation. I really like this ability. It's very similar to what High Elves get, um, except they get a little bit more out of it. It would be nice to have verbiage here about if you have spell slots from a casting feature, you can cast these spells as well with those slots. I don't know if maybe they're just going to have a general rule somewhere else that will explain that's in later playtest packages. We'll see. So World of Wonders, you have proficiency with the Arcana skill. That's nice. The culture you grew up in was very magic focused, and so you have some magic you can do, and you know a lot about magic. Makes sense. Grove heritage traits. Wood elves. See, again, elves. a heritage. It shouldn't be stuck to elves, and yet that's how it's in my brain because this is how it's laid out in the document. So these are woodsy people, forest folk. So alignment suggestion, beast affinity. Using gestures and sounds, you can communicate simple ideas with beasts, and you have advantage on checks made to interact with non-hostile beasts. Uh, that's nice. That's something the Furbolg got in 5e, and so now they're just giving it to this heritage. You grew up around creatures every day, all the time, and so you understand. You could explain this magically or just innate. You have observed creatures your entire life, forest creatures, and so you kind of know one how to understand their feelings and their current mood and how to sort of get some simple ideas across to them. Or magically, you grew up with them in an enchanted forest, and that magic imbued you from living there so long. Magical radiation, you soaked it up. Um, Canopy walker, you have a climbing speed equal to your walking speed. Makes perfect sense. You lived in trees all your life, so you're good at climbing. I like that. That's new. Elf weapon training, proficiency with longsword, short bow, and longbow. Makes sense. I like it. Languages. Cool. Same thing. Common and one extra. Humans. So I like that they describe them as like the youngest race um, uh, or peoples in the world. Um, and so since they're so new, they're very adaptable to things. So age, size, speed, ambitious. This is very human is the variant human from fifth edition. Um, it seems to be the standard. So you get an extra talent at first level. Uh, you gain proficiency with one skill of your choice, that too, and gain one talent of your choice. Talent can be from any talent list, but you must meet the talent's prerequisites. That's another thing. I can't wait to see if talents in this will have talent trees. You take the first one before you take the second one, and they kind of enhance each other. That's something that's very previous editions and also very Pathfinder. Um, Human-related heritages. Basically, you've got city folk and you got country folk here. Um, my Arkansas came through for a second. And so, you have nomadic, where you're resilient, you have advantage on checks or saves made to resist debilitating weather effects caused by extreme heat or cold. Additionally, when you complete a short rest, you can reduce your exhaustion level by 1. Once used, you cannot reduce your exhaustion level in this way again until you complete a long rest. You have proficiency with the travel skill, and then it has a little extra wording here because, again, I think even when they wrote these, they were thinking, oh, this is a human heritage. Um, I'd like to understand if they meant it to be like, hey, we're sticking with heritages being part of lineage, but we're giving you a rule where you can be flexible with it. I don't know. And then before I talk about these, I'm just going to read both of them. Cosmopolitan, city folk. Street smarts, while in a city or other urban environment, you and your group can't become lost except by magical means. While you are in such environments, you also can't be surprised except when you are asleep or otherwise incapacitated. Worldly wisdom, whenever you make a check related to understanding the purpose or significance of a building, rite, or object from a culture you aren't familiar with, you can add your proficiency bonus to the roll. If you have proficiency in a relevant skill or tool, you can double your proficiency bonus to the roll. And then language. So, okay, if heritages are separated from lineages, then these two heritages are weak. I mean, we go back and we look at Cloud Elves. They got a skill proficiency. Cool. But they also got a cantrip and 2 spells. Um, the Grove uh, heritage, you can communicate with beasts. You have a climbing speed. You have weapon proficiencies. Um, the Fireforge gets tool proficiencies that are doubled, fire resistance, you can speak to elementals, and you get a cantrip that has a bonus use to it. Whereas with the humans, you're good in bad weather and you can, you get less tired. Once per day, you get less tired and you can't get lost. And as long as you're awake, you can't be surprised if you're in a city. And you can add your proficiency bonus to figuring stuff out, which this is weird anyway. Like, I feel like the use of this, when you make a check related to understanding the purpose or significance of a building, rite, or object from a culture you aren't familiar with, you can add your proficiency bonus to the roll. So that's basically if you have the cosmopolitan heritage and you're making a history check and you don't have proficiency, then you get to have proficiency. It's very niche, very specific to the situation. I don't know. They just seem weak compared to the other ones. So let me know what you think. How could these be improved? Should we break them out into separate lists? So after that, we get into backgrounds. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to split the backgrounds and talents into a separate video just because this one's running longer than I want. So check back soon for a separate video talking about Black Flag's Playtest Packet 1, backgrounds, and talents. Peace.